Most people talk about the startup journey from idea to IPO as if it were a clean staircase, one step logically following another, but anyone who has actually walked that road knows it feels more like stumbling through fog, guided less by certainty and more by a stubborn refusal to turn back once you have seen a problem clearly enough that you can no longer unsee it. The journey does not begin with a pitch deck or a funding round. It begins with irritation, an itch, a moment when you encounter something inefficient, unfair, or broken, and realize that the people who are supposed to fix it have no incentive to do so. That is where the idea is born, not as a business, but as a quiet obsession. In the beginning, the idea is fragile and intoxicating at the same time. You test it in conversations, half joking, half hoping, watching people's reactions for signs that you are not alone in seeing the problem. Most ideas die right here, not because they are bad, but because the founder is not willing to tolerate uncertainty long enough to find out if they are real. The ones that survive move into the loneliest phase of all building before permission. There is no validation, yet. No customers, no investors, just you. A small team, if you are lucky, and a growing sense that you are either early or wrong. From the inside, those two feelings are indistinguishable. Early execution is brutal because everything matters and nothing works. You build the first version knowing it will disappoint you, ship it anyway, and wait for reality to respond. Sometimes, reality is silence, which is worse than rejection. You tweak, adjust, simplify, and slowly, painfully, a few people start to care. That first real traction is dangerous. It feels like proof, but it is only a hint. Many startups mistake this moment for arrival and scale too early, hiring, spending, and committing to assumptions that have not been tested under pressure. The journey to IPO is littered with companies that grew fast on weak foundations and collapsed the moment the market demanded consistency instead of novelty. Fundraising enters the story not as fuel, but as temptation. Capital amplifies whatever is already there. If you have clarity, it accelerates progress. If you have confusion, it accelerates failure. I have seen founders raise money thinking it would buy them time, only to discover it bought them expectations instead. Investors do not fund certainty. They fund narratives about the future, and once you accept their money, you are committing to turning that narrative into something real. That pressure changes decision-making. Suddenly, you are not just building a product, you are managing belief. As the company grows, the work shifts from creation to alignment. What you could once fix with a late night now requires meetings, systems, and trust. Culture stops being something you talk about and becomes something you live with, for better or worse. Every early compromise shows up here. The co-founder issues you avoided, the values you never articulated, the shortcuts you justified in the name of speed all compound. Scaling is not about adding people. It is about subtracting ambiguity. Most startups struggle at this stage because clarity is harder than creativity and far less glamorous. If you survive this far, you enter a phase outsiders call success and insiders call pressure. Revenue grows, headcount expands, and the company starts to matter to people who did not sign up for the original chaos. Employees have families. Customers depend on you. Regulators notice you. The freedom of the early days disappears, replaced by responsibility. This is where many founders burn out or lose their edge, not because the work is harder, but because it is different. The skills that created the company are not the same ones required to stabilize it. An IPO, if it comes at all, is not a victory lap. It is a transformation. Going public does not mean you have finished building. It means you have agreed to build in full view, under constant scrutiny, with far less room for error. The company shifts from a private experiment into a public institution. Decisions that once took minutes now take months. Transparency replaces secrecy. Discipline replaces intuition. For founders, this moment often brings an unexpected sense of loss. The company no longer belongs to the small group that birthed it. It belongs to the market. What people rarely understand is that the IPO does not validate the journey in the way they imagine. It does not retroactively make every sacrifice worth it or every mistake brilliant. It simply marks a checkpoint where the rules change again. Some founders thrive here, learning to operate within constraints. Others step aside, recognizing that their role was always to begin, not to govern. Neither choice is failure. Failure is clinging to a role you have outgrown and dragging the company down with you. From idea to IPO, the startup journey is less about growth curves and more about identity shifts. Each stage asks a different question. At the idea stage, it asks, do you understand a problem deeply enough to suffer for it? At the early stage, it asks, can you learn faster than you bleed? At scale, it asks, can you replace chaos with clarity without killing what made you special? And at IPO, it asks whether you are ready to let go of the illusion of control and accept that building something enduring now requires a different kind of discipline than the one that got you here. Because once you cross that threshold, the company stops being a reflection of your will and starts becoming a reflection of your systems, your culture, and the decisions you made years ago when no one was watching. And that realization usually arrives quietly late at night, when you finally understand that the journey you thought was leading toward freedom has actually been leading toward a deeper form of responsibility, one that cannot be delegated, rushed, or escaped. And it is right there in the middle of that realization that this first part of the story pauses before the sentence completes itself and forces you to confront what it truly means to keep building when the game has changed and the stakes are no longer just about survival, but about stewardship. Because from that point on, the question is no longer whether you can build a startup, but whether you are willing to become the kind of leader the next phase demands, even if that means letting go of the version of yourself that started the journey in the first place and stepping into something far less romantic, but far more consequential. And that is where the thought deliberately stops, right in the middle of the sentence, waiting for what comes next. A responsibility that cannot be outsourced or hidden behind vision anymore. Because once the company reaches this stage, every weakness you postponed addressing becomes structural. Every value you treated as optional becomes cultural. And every shortcut you justified in the early days quietly turns into technical debt of the soul. This is the moment founders rarely talk about honestly, because it does not fit the heroic narrative of startups. The work stops being about invention and becomes about integrity. From here on, the journey demands a different kind of maturity. You are no longer just solving problems. You are shaping incentives, power dynamics, and long-term consequences. Decisions ripple outward in ways you can no longer predict intuitively. The speed that once saved you now threatens to break things that cannot be easily repaired. You learn often too late that discipline is not the opposite of innovation, but its only chance of survival at scale. Many founders struggle here because they are still fighting the last war. They rely on instincts that worked when the company was small and scrappy, when personal heroics could patch systemic flaws. At scale, heroics create chaos. What the company needs now are clear principles, repeatable processes, and leaders who can say no, even when the idea is exciting. This transition feels like betrayal to the founder identity you built early on, and resisting it is one of the most common ways promising companies stumble after apparent success. An IPO intensifies this pressure rather than resolving it. Public markets do not reward vision alone. They reward predictability, governance, and trust. Suddenly, the company's story is no longer told only by you, but by analysts, journalists, and quarterly reports. Every decision is dissected. Every misstep is amplified. This exposure forces a reckoning. Either you evolve into a steward who understands the weight of public trust, or you step aside for someone who can. Both paths require humility, and humility is the rarest trait in environments that celebrate boldness. What makes this phase especially disorienting is that externally everything looks like success. Valuation headlines prestige all the markers founders are taught to chase. Internally, however, there is often a sense of narrowing, fewer options, less freedom, more constraints. The founders who survive this without becoming bitter are the ones who redefine what winning means. They stop measuring success by control and start measuring it by resilience, by whether the company can function well without their constant presence. This is also where the startup journey exposes its final paradox. The thing you set out to build, as an expression of your vision, eventually demands that you detach from that vision being personal. The company must become bigger than you, or it will remain fragile. Letting go does not mean abandoning purpose. It means embedding it so deeply into systems and culture that it no longer depends on your mood, energy, or charisma. This is the hardest form of leadership because it offers the least emotional reward. Looking back, the path from idea to IPO is not a story of acceleration, but of repeated letting go. Letting go of certainty, then control, then identity. Each stage strips something away in exchange for scale. The founders who misunderstand this treat each loss as a betrayal. The ones who understand it treat each loss as a necessary trade-off for durability. The journey is not fair, but it is consistent. And here is the truth that only becomes clear. At the end, an IPO does not complete the startup journey. It closes one chapter and opens another that is often less romantic, but far more impactful. The company now influences markets' livelihoods and sometimes entire industries. The question shifts from, can this survive, to should this shape the world in this way? That ethical weight is real, and ignoring it is how companies that once felt visionary slowly lose public trust. If you are early in your journey, do not idolize the IPO. Understand it for what it is, a transition into responsibility at a scale most people never experience. If you are approaching it, prepare not just your financials, but yourself. Ask whether you are willing to become the kind of leader the next phase requires, or whether your greatest contribution was always meant to be the beginning. Both answers can be honorable if chosen consciously. And if you are somewhere in the middle, building, through uncertainty, with no guarantee of what lies ahead, take comfort in this. The confusion, the pressure, the constant feeling that you are outgrowing your own skills are not signs that you are failing. They are signs that the journey is working as it should. The startup path is not designed to make you comfortable. It is designed to reveal who you are willing to become as the stakes rise. If this story helped you see the startup journey more clearly, subscribe to the channel for grounded conversations about building companies beyond the hype, and leave a comment sharing which stage you are in right now, because naming your stage is often the first step toward navigating it with intention instead of reacting blindly to whatever comes next.